bienvenida en este panel sobre inteligencia artificial a Neil Chilson. Neil, please, could you join us? También a Loren Rotner. Loren, please. Christian Elam, also, please, could you join us? Este panel lo va a moderar Niamh Perrin. Niamh, thank you very much. Un aplauso a nuestros participantes.
Woohoo! Okay, cool. Well, we have probably the greatest panel to kick off with today, so no pressure, but I want you to go hard. Our panel is Control and Utility with AI, and we have three very esteemed Americans. So why don't you start off by introducing who you are and maybe your number one AI-related question so we can get in the thick of it.
Sure, I'll start. I'm Neil Chilson. I am the head of AI policy at the Abundance Institute, which is a relatively new C3 think tank that's focused on making sure that emerging technologies have the right cultural and policy environment to generate the widespread human prosperity that we think emerging technologies can deliver. I spent some time, I'm a lawyer and a computer scientist. I spent some time as the chief technologist at the Federal Trade Commission, one of those regulators of technology in the US. And so when I think about the number one question that in artificial intelligence, well, I'm gonna cheat a little bit, there's two. The number one question for all of you is, what are you going to do with tools that make your intelligence more actionable and give you more power to do new things? That's the number one question for you. The number one question for policymakers, and I don't mean that it's the most important question, but it is the first question. They have to define what AI is, and they have to distinguish it somehow from what is computing generally. That's a very difficult problem, but it has real impacts for policy. Loren?
Hi, I'm Loren Rotner. I'm the director of a new nonprofit think tank in Austin, Texas. It's called the Cosmos Institute. We are a 501c3 that's working at the intersection of the philosophy of human flourishing and AI. And I'm proud to announce that we are establishing a new AI lab at the University of Oxford. It's going to be the first classical liberal AI lab in the world. And so we're extremely excited about this. I myself come from the founding team of the University of Austin, which is a new startup university in Austin. We're extreme admirers of what you all are doing here. I think we need more innovation in higher education, and I think AI can play a big role in that. The biggest question I have about AI is whether AI will serve human flourishing or whether it'll diminish humanity. And that is really our greatest concern. We heard a little bit earlier about some of the hoopla around risk to humanity, apocalyptic risk, the end of humanity. We want to transition the conversation from that to a focus on the more banal risks to human freedom. Because what AI could do is it could serve as a substitute for human life rather than a supplement to human life. And so we're looking to support projects that energize humans, that allow them to use their capacities in ways that are conducive to human freedom rather than diminish them. So you'll hear more about that in a moment.
My name is Christian Elam. I'm one of the founding general partners of Bachmanity Capital, a deep tech venture fund investing in aerospace, infrastructure, robotics, and a lot in national security. My personal background is I was in product previously, worked for a number of startups starting when I was pretty young. I taught myself how to code, and youngest go to Stanford when I was 10 years old for his computer science program, and started a few companies. So anyway, my big question is not what are you going to do with the technology, but how are you going to start preparing yourself now to be able to fully leverage it?
Very good. So also, I'm from Foresight Institute. I'm Chief of Innovation and Strategy there. We're an all-woman team that we've existed for 40 years now. Eric Drexler and Christine Pedersen were our co-founders. And we do nanotech, biotech, computation, space tech, and neurotech, as well as an existential hope program. So we offer fellowships, grants, prizes, seminars, workshops, and what we call Big Vision Weekends, which happen twice a year, and they're kind of like places where everybody can get together, break their silos, and actually start creating and co-creating. And we have Brendan McCord speaking at Vision Weekend USA, which is coming up in December. And recently we had Eli on our Existential Hope podcast. So, you know, we are very involved, I guess, in many ways with these people, which is pretty wonderful. I do wonder if we could hitch it back to all of you, because we have obviously heard about risk and the doom, but we also need to focus on the hope. So I would love to know if everyone could raise their hand and tell me which one you're kind of like leaning toward. Are you a bit more afraid of AI, or are you kind of really excited for it? Put your hand up if you're afraid. And what if you're pretty excited? Ooh, that's exciting. That's great. Okay, cool. And then tell me about AGI. So AGI is, say, we're going to get an intelligence that's going to be as clued up as humans. Do you think the timeline for reaching this intelligence is 5 years away? No. 10 years away? 15 years away? 30 years away? Okay, I'm just going to go with never. Who thinks it's never going to happen? Wow, okay. I think foresight sits more on the scale that we are thinking that it's like 2.5 to 5 years away in terms of, yeah, we've got pretty short timelines. So speaking of that, where do you three think that you probably agree and disagree? Yeah, let's go straight into the disagree. Where do you think you disagree in terms of timelines, AI, AGI?
I mean, we'll find out, I suppose. I think probably, I suspect that we might disagree the most on solutions. I think generally, I don't think that we're big doomers up here, so I think we see the same set of problems, but we might disagree a little bit on solutions. I'm going to bring my experience in the political space where I see lots of tech panics all the time, and I see overreach and non-solutions often, and often things that make that we were pointing out that don't really address any of the underlying incentives of politicians, and often create regulatory environments that benefit incumbents and stop innovation and disruption. So maybe we have more agreement on that than I think, but I suspect that might be a little place of this.
I think a lot depends on what we mean by AGI. And, you know, there's a lot of debate about this. I mean, does it require consciousness? Does it merely mean the substitute for anything that a human being could really do, like practically in the world? I think we have a little bit of an overconfidence in predicting the future. You know, there's going to be a lot of emergent properties in terms of AI and technological innovation. Is it going to move in an AGI direction? I don't know, you know? And I think there's a little bit of an overabundance of certainty about what's going to come. So I take a little bit more of a cautionary approach. I mean, it seems to me that it's possible. And again, the thing that I'm really worried about is just that it will substitute, that will become dependent upon it, rather than it really enhancing and supplementing our capacities. And that could be a real crisis for human freedom, right? It could enable a centralized despotic order. And that's the thing that I think we have the most to fear.
So do you think we need to make more aligned AI?
Yeah, so one thing about the alignment discussion that I find interesting, I do think it raises to consciousness the idea that technology is not value neutral, right? There are principles that guide it, and so we saw this with the Gemini debacle, right? Which was obvious for everyone to see that there were certain values and principles that were guiding what the prompts would allow you to generate. And so we need to make sure that alignment you know, is downstream from the right principles and the right conversation and the right consciousness about what the concerns ought to be, right? if we begin from a vision, a doomer vision that the world is going to blow up, that will influence, right, the principles that we inject into AI, right, and that guides AI development. If we have a kind of transhumanist EAC vision, I'm not sure how familiar everyone is with this, but that will, of course.
Maybe explain.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So the EAC vision, it stands for effective accelerationism. It's often the opponent to the so-called doomer X risk vision. And I think the most intelligent statement of it is something called the Techno-Optimist Manifesto, which was published by Mark Andreessen's VC firm. I recommend that people look it up. It's actually very interesting. And what it hopes for is a future where, and I think we saw this a little bit earlier with one of the earlier presentations, where human beings become a little bit more irrelevant, that we birth something that is greater than us. And there's this hope for and awe for this kind of God that we could create. And I think a part of that, of course, is liberating human beings from drudgery and any kind of use of human intelligence, I think. And so it's a vision that I think ultimately I share some sympathy with it, but I think it's deeply anti-human. And we're critics of it ultimately. But.
And they are, at the moment, trying to build suffering into conscious AI. So suffering is like a huge part of the human condition, right? If we know how to suffer, we know how to empathize, or we can live through some troubled times. Like, I think that that's a really important part to try and engage with. But maybe you could speak to flourishing. What would be the ultimate AI future that you can envisage? Where's the positivity? What's it going to look like?
Well, I think there's is this working? Amazing positivity with it in terms of everybody already knows all the discoveries, and especially in the medical field, precision medicine, I think is really amazing in terms of mental health, because I do a lot of work in the mental health space personally, in terms of recognizing, those that are struggling before they fully realize it, and be able to get them the mental health resources, especially when other people don't really know that they're in a place of struggling and depression. I think in terms of education, that's where I'm probably most excited about is I personally want to take a wrecking ball to our education system, at least in the US. And AI's ability to have fully individualized education based off your specific talents and where you don't exceed at, and not being forced to do the things that you don't really want to participate in. That was my big frustration growing up with school, and why I decided to kind of create my own education pathway. And so to see the capabilities of what people will do when they highlight their individuality and purpose, I think will be marvelous.
Okay, cool.
Can I just add a little bit? I think an ideal, I'll stay within like possibly realistic ideal, because we could all like dream big or dream horrible scenarios, but is that we don't, like in 10 years, we don't talk about things using AI. It's just like part of what happens. And that is the trend throughout history of AI research, that once it works, we just stop calling it AI and we just call it computers. When I was a kid and AI really drew me into this space, cutting edge AI research was chess playing. Now, like everybody's phone, you can download 100 apps that probably play chess better than 99% of the people in here, although this is a very smart crowd, so maybe it's a little less than that. But, and so I think in 10 years, great success would be we don't die in car accidents anymore. We have personalized medicine. Education is personalized. But we don't think of this as bots or something that like sits outside of us. It's just the tools that we use to do the things that we need to do.
Since I do a lot in the defense side, I think too it's really important AI's role in common sense, and not super emotional when making decisions based off national security. So anyway.
I'll just add that it has the tremendous potential, like with crypto, to decentralize power. And I think that's the most hopeful thing, I think, and it'll be so constitutive of human flourishing if that's possible. If we eliminate bureaucratic centralized control or reduce it tremendously and leverage AI to create efficiencies in the administrative state, then there could be a much greater sense for citizen control and local control and human freedom.
Well, I think we should jump in on governance now. But I'm fascinated by the notion of hypergaia and the idea that AI is going to allow us to start communicating with animals and plants, and the fact that we're pretty close right now when it comes to speaking with animals, with Earth Species Project and the AI with whales. Does everyone know about this? Because I find it pretty beautiful. Okay, cool. So they have figured out how to, if they make a sound, a whale is going to respond in a certain way. And they've also found this with other animal species as well. And so it's almost the Rosetta Stone. We now just need to figure out what it is that we're saying to them when we make these sounds. So I think that that's going to also have a huge effect on when we're talking about medicine, when it comes to the animal testing. I think there's going to be like some pretty incredible co-creation, understanding of like how we can make a better planet. And then also, obviously, we've got to start exploring other planets at some stage. So I think it's going to get pretty wild and pretty cool in the coming years. But when we need to talk about governance, let's go. How do you think, well, yeah, what do you see as being the ultimate outcome when it comes to AI governance? It's a pretty contentious space at the moment.
So I think success in governance will be we stop talking about AI at a really abstract level. That's a problem, right?
Yeah.
And we start talking about it at the application level. We say like, oh, we're using these new tools in medicine. How does the regulatory system around medicine address certain harms that might come from this? Or how is it possibly holding back the benefits that can come from this technology? And then we address those specific issues in that vertical. I find it very challenging to think of AI policy at a very abstract level because we're talking about something that is a general purpose technology. We don't really know, and the risk factors are radically different depending on if you're talking about generating images online or having a chatbot versus, deployment in a military device or, being used for specialized medicine.
Can government structures actually implement policy on AI? It's such a fast-moving target.
Well, we have tons of policy around all of these applications.
Sure, but is it working?
I mean,
Sorry,
is the medical system in the U.S. working? I mean, it has some problems, right? And some of those are very regulatory driven, and some of those might help be solved by AI, but we won't solve those problems if we say, hey, let's regulate AI in the abstract, and then somehow it's going to fix all the problems in the medical sector. We have to look down at the application and say, what are the actual risks and benefits in here, and let's make policy that addresses those risks and allows the benefits in each of the policy areas where AI will be deployed. I think that's a much more concrete, it's much easier to explain to a legislator what to do, and I think it actually is much more likely to not over-regulate or under-regulate depending on the sector.
So in the mid-2010s, there was this philosopher named Nick Bostrom, and probably many people in this audience have heard of him. He's an Oxford philosopher. Wrote a book called Superintelligence that really dominated the conversation. Elon Musk was very influenced by it. And in the book, he says that the threat to humanity that AI poses, the only thing that can contend with it is a consolidated world state, okay? To erase all national barriers and all individual regulatory systems, you need a completely coordinated regulatory order. This is the thing we have to fear. In our opinion, at the Cosmos Institute, and I think as libertarians. I think we need to make a much greater case about the decentralizing benefits of AI and try to wean ourselves off of this fear, this obsession we have with the precautionary principle. And so I think there are really two tracks, right? I think we have this drift towards a tendency toward trying to control the world, make it predictable, make it as legible as possible, rather than embracing a sort of spontaneous order. And so I don't deny that there are risks, but the solution certainly isn't in what Sam Altman has referred to as global democratic governance. That's not going to enhance human freedom, for sure.
I don't have much to add because I very much agree with what they said.
Oh, really? Because you've also had quite a hand in creating policy too, though, no?
Yeah, one thing that, I'm starting to see, and I'm sure all of you are starting to see, which gives me a little bit of hope, is bringing in the right stakeholders in creating the policy. So, my background's not in policy, but I did co-author portions of the Kids Online Safety Act, recently passed in the Senate. But the thing with that was, we were talking with the senators somewhat jokingly, and it was like, please tell me you 80-year-old senators are not writing tech policy about the youth mental health, and you're not talking to kids about what that even means. And they were looking at me like, why are you asking this question? And I was like, well, that's exactly the problem. And so, we put together this council that brings in youth representatives. So it's the first time in U.S. history of formally building in youth representation into a federal policy, as far as we know, as well as representatives from big tech on how do you actually implement this. Several attorney generals and congressmen, but the main thing with it is everybody has to go through some level of mental health training so they know the language of, what they're developing, as well as have, a skin in the game by being parents themselves. And so anyway, so creating, I think, this approach in regulating, I think regulation does need to exist in some manner. You can't just let it roam freely, but bringing in the right people, especially on certain specific topics, not just being hypothetical about it.
Okay, so you do think that governments are still best positioned to regulate AI?
I wouldn't say best positioned,
Okay. Yeah?
but I do think that they obviously have a role in it, especially in terms of funding the fundamental development of it. One sort of hope that I would have is, given our global debt crisis, especially in the U.S., instead of government, constantly increasing taxes and doing all these, absurd things, that them actually investing in this core technology will, create a really great income from that can supplement the debt.
Neil, I can see you
You
itching.
see me
Jump
itching.
in.
So one of the things that I find often confusing about the governance discussion is that people are like, well, who should govern technology? And govern means steer, and that is a command and control approach by itself. And so the government, if that is the approach we're taking to technology, the government is the best suited to do that. But that is not the approach that historically technology takes. It has lots of other factors that govern it by constraining it, but a lot of those are social norms. They're obviously market incentives. And so when companies act in their interest in producing a product, they hold back, right? Often, and if you've ever been on one of these red teaming exercises at a company, you would be shocked at how much they hold back on what they're doing. I think the thing that I'm trying to translate people to is talk about oh, you know how to red team. You're really interested about red teaming the models that you put out, but you're extremely naive about policy. And so you should red team the hell out of policy. How are people going to misuse policy in this space? And if you do that, you might get the government's role to be precise, targeted towards actual harms, and leave the other ways that we allow technology to emerge and create benefits in a market-tested way to create the flourishing that we want.
There might be a role for government in, forcing, I would say, very closed source, consolidated AI companies to open up, to make the ways in which LLMs make their calls and make their probabilistic decisions, make that more legible. We just saw, I think, that Anthropic released their internal documents that show how their models make decisions, which I think we need more of that. I think right now it's a black box, and I think the great danger, I think, with LLMs, I mean, the way they make their determinations is they take all of the diversity of human opinion and human thought on the internet, and they reduce it down to a median opinion, right? And it consolidates, it flattens, it homogenizes, and that's something I really very much worry about. We want more pluralism. We want more access. Like, I mean, that was really the promise of the internet, and I think it remains the promise of the internet. As we become more, reliant, especially in university settings, et cetera, on LLMs, and we ask, for assistance on homework or to explain, the meaning of a passage, et cetera, we want that LLM to open the mind and not close it. And so there might be a space for government, if it has that kind of consciousness, to try to open up these companies and make them more legible and orient them and steer them a little bit more in the direction of supporting human freedom.
I think there's a lot of really great opportunity right now, more so than kind of any other industry, for private-public partnership, because policymakers, this is part of the problem of why government is probably not best suited to create regulations from the standpoint of they're just not educated in what this technology is or means. As just an example, one of our portfolio companies, Polygraph, and the founder, Yagub, was speaking with a couple senators around advising them on AI policy, and one of the senators got really angry when he was talking about it, and was saying, what does AI have to do with computers? And I don't really know what to say to that, except the senator thought it was artificial insemination, not artificial intelligence. So, these are the people that are representing us and our country and deciding on our future.
And making innovation standards, whoa.
Yeah, exactly. And so, anyway, getting involved and helping from the technology standpoint. I have seen a few chief of staff for some of the senators who are former senior software engineers at AWS and different backgrounds, so I think that's very encouraging. So anyway.
All right, so we're in Mexico right now. What advice would you give in terms of creating a great place to innovate, or how would you inspire?
That's a great question. Software and AI is primarily software, although there is a giant hardware component to it. But the applications, the things that are actually going to deliver value to consumers, is relatively borderless. And so I would encourage all of you as students to immediately start using these tools. Many of them are free to access. You can learn a lot about how to learn them, how to use them by asking them themselves. Anytime somebody says them to talk about AI, I cringe, so I'm cringing at myself right now. But you can use these tools to ask how to use them, and I think that's very useful. So encouraging people to do that, not taking a fear-based approach to these tools, but saying like, hey, let me actually get familiar with how these things work before I start making policy. I think that's really important. And that is something that, sure, it is helpful maybe to have an AWS engineer come in and explain to you how the servers work. But if you want to get a flavor for how they work, like, it's pretty easy to just log in and try them out. And so I would very much encourage that as a first step. And then let's, we're still early stages here. There's lots to be done, and it certainly should not all be done in the US. I think there's a lot of potential for lots of places around the world to contribute enormously in this space. So I'm excited about it.
I would encourage the students in the audience especially to not pursue a narrow technical path. So what we need is we need new technologists, I think. We need technologists that are, and I think this university is really very much a part of this. We need technologists that are deeply steeped in the philosophy of human flourishing, in classical liberal ideas, and ideas even prior to classical liberal ideas, right? Because we don't want to just be dogmatic supporters of classical liberalism. We need to be awake to some of the problems or dangers that maybe lurk, that we may not be fully aware of, right? And so I would encourage everyone in this audience, like, don't become too reliant on LLMs. Like, use them in the way that they can support the development of your reason and intelligence, and don't just depend upon them. Read old books, like physical books. I think that's extremely important, right? And it's very easy, I think. Look, I fall prey to this. I think everybody falls prey to this. You know, 20% of our discretionary time right now is mediated by an algorithm, either in a phone or in a computer. And it's going to increase. I mean,
100% if you count this thing.
Right. So try to get offline. Try to read old books. You know, there's a lot of wisdom, of course, in the classical liberal tradition, and all of these people wrote prior to LLMs. That's where I think the great treasure of wisdom can be found, not necessarily in an algorithm. I think an algorithm can help. LLM can help, but you know, it needs to be capped. So develop broad skills, read broadly. Don't just read Twitter. Don't let LLMs write for you. You know, that's an extreme temptation, I think, and we'll see more and more of that. Develop the skills to write on your own, to think on your own. You'll be so much better leveraged in the market if you're able to think and write and speak fluently, because there will be a new generation of young people who are not able to do those things because they were raised on LLMs. So don't mean to be pessimistic, but I do think LLMs could be valuable, but we need to be aware of some of the dangers.
I don't know. Personalized education from LLMs could be pretty fascinating and really guide people. Also, an LLM, everybody knows what that is, right? A large language model. Yeah? Good. Yeah, just making sure. Take it away, Christian.
Well, he kind of stole everything I was going to say. Anyway, I think, you know, the technology is there at our fingertips. I think what is not is the critical thinking. So really focusing on that and exactly, you know, what he was saying and how you can leverage that technology to more optimize your own workflow and studies. And, you know, I oftentimes when I'm bored and I'm just curious about learning very, you know, out there things, just sit on the couch and ask ChatGPT, teach me about quantum mechanics and dark energy and dark matter and what's the difference. And, you know, it's a fun pathway to go down. But my kind of eye-opening moment was a couple years ago, or whenever it was, you know, the day ChatGPT launched, and I had 30 minutes in between one of my meetings. So I was just testing it out, and then ended up canceling the rest of my day's meetings because I was just like, this is really impressive. Asking it, you know, just your basic questions on write me a poem and a history essay and a whatever. But then, you know, I'm being a technologist trying to break it and see where its limits are. And so, you know, one of my portfolio companies had just acquired this company, and so it was on top of mine. So I asked it, you know, write a one-pager based off my new startup called Heartbeat that would, you put the 2 fingers on the back camera of your phone and it would track your heart rate and talk you down from a anxiety and panic attack. And it created the entire one-pager beautifully. I then asked it to create, you know, the website for it, coded the whole website, asked it to make a pitch deck for VCs, created the whole pitch deck and a list of 20 VCs that invest specifically in that area to reach out to. And then I asked it to code the app, and it coded the UI for it, not the back end. But within, you know, 30 minutes, I have an entire new company, pitch deck, investor list, most of the technology, marketing materials, and the legal materials, and that would have cost, you know, $100,000 probably, and friends and family capital plus, you know, maybe 6 months or something.
Sleeplessness.
So anyway, using, you know, your critical thinking and ideas and the technologies there. So see what you can do with it.
Yeah, it is pretty fascinating stuff. I heard of a really cool piece of tech the other day that literally just takes a photo of you, and from that live photo can measure all of your blood. And they're using it right now, like instead of having to do a really costly blood test, and so they can figure out your iron levels and all sorts, just using the camera on your phone, which is pretty amazing because it's non-invasive, it's cheap, it can, change a lot of lives very quickly and easily. So, similar and very cool that we have this thing. If only the iPhone was designed for the female or woman hand, you know? Come on. So, how many women coders do we have in the room? Well, there we go. We got to start, right? It's pretty important. There are other roles in this field, so yeah. Oh, that kind of just broke my heart a little bit. Cool. Well, 20 years from now, where do you think we're going to be? Is there any parting words that you'd like to leave? Like, obviously, everyone here is pretty excited about AI. That's how they opened. So what are your parting words?
I mean, I think we really need to, well, you talked about talking to whales. I just want to give another concrete example. Yeah. There was recently an ALS patient who, it's a degenerative brain disease, who's the brain works fine, but parts of it don't communicate to your mouth muscles, for example. So he could not talk. But using the same technology, a similar technology, I assume, to translating signals from whales, they could translate the signals in his brain about like what muscle should move, and they could then use that to generate speech. So this guy who has not been able to speak can now think and speak through a computer, and that is because of this. It's not because some chatbot. No. It's not because like some killer robot. It's because of these techniques that can gather a bunch of data and tie the signals together and create something that is basically science fiction and that is making, has a potential to make a ton of people's lives a lot better. So I'm really excited about it. I'm glad you guys are excited about it too. Let's not let policy wreck it.
Yeah, BCIs. So they're trained. You can have them implants, and they can also be wearable. And it's pretty fascinating stuff. So for about a year, they trained one woman to go through. Like I watched it also at UCSF, and there was this woman, and she had only ever been able to grunt her whole life. And for a year, they trained her to think the word that they had on the screen, and she wore this device, and it was pretty like hard for her, like it was pretty labor intensive. So she'd do it, and then she'd get really tired, take a week off, then do it again. She was just like going for it, At the end of the year, the very first question they asked her, like off topic, like free question that wasn't like prescripted in any way. She wasn't just repeating in her mind like circle, 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 or something like that. Was what makes you a good person? And she said, I'm a really good big sister, but I'm an even better listener. And that made me actually howl when I watched the video, just because obviously she'd only been able to listen up until that point, and she hadn't been able to communicate to others as easily. She obviously could communicate, but it was like through feeling, through look. And I thought that was like super powerful. And so if we look at neurotech, we're going to be going in like a really interesting direction. We've never fully simulated the brain. We've never mapped it. We don't know a lot within it. So as neurotech and AI develops in that area, we should be able to help millions and millions of people. Mental illness is one thing, but then it also goes like further than that. Not further, because that's obviously, but you know what I mean. It's like, it's really important. And so, AI has the ability to really help us understand, affect in a positive way a lot of people's lives. And if we can start talking to animals and doing this hypergaia, we're probably going to learn a lot. We're probably going to learn how to do things better. It's not necessarily going to be like a backwards thing. And it could be pretty fascinating, actually, to learn and have those conversations. Sorry.
No, that was interesting.
I could talk about this.
So I think with Neil, in 20 years' time, I really look forward to the possibility of many competing open source models where competition's good, right? Right now we have a very narrow consolidated world in AI and LLMs. Compute is very expensive. Compute becomes a lot cheaper. Look, we can all, use our feet and use our brains to, try out different models and see really what serves us. And I'm sure with greater competition, greater decentralization in AI, that will unlock, I think, a much greater possibility of a future that is more oriented towards human flourishing rather than, suppressing.
And Loren, do you know who coined the term open source?
No.
Christine Pedersen, the co-founder of Foresight Institute. So women do have impact in this space. Yes.
My biggest hope, and especially in 20 years from now, is really, again, the individualized approach with education. I think it all starts there. Having great ideas and the technology available to be able to create it, as well as bringing forth, hopefully, a lot more unity and less division and polarization, for communities and collaboration, seeing what comes from it. And on the defense side, a lot less fatalities. So, we've developed in-house attaching lasers to drones to target and take out enemy drone swarms and missiles. But one of the key, areas within that is the UN recently did a study and found out that it's going to take over 700 years of demining efforts to get rid of the minefields in Ukraine. And so having the drones be able to fly over it, pick up the heat signature, and melt the explosive then and there, rather than having 700 years of men, going out and potentially dying. So anyway.
I just want to second what Christian said about education. I mean, I think AI has tremendous potential to unite people of, just widely different backgrounds, starting points, who want to learn and want to come together. That was the original promise of the internet. AI could do it in an extremely frictionless way. And I really look forward to that as well. I mean, I'm very hopeful about that. Not only on the personalized side, but like actually bringing people together and generating real intellectual community. There could be an explosion of that.
You didn't ask us our doom scenarios, and we only have 3 minutes left, so that's good. Let's keep going.
I mean, if you want to go.
What is your doom scenario, Neil?
I mean, the doom scenario is centralized control of this stuff, right? And that is
China.
a lot of the X-risk people, I think, they actually see centralization as a tool to fight back against AI, where I think it really unlocks the biggest risk, which is that humans will misuse this stuff. When we talk about human value alignment, like, humans don't have aligned values, right? They have really different values. Some of them want to just watch the world burn, And so I think AI has the potential to supercharge some of those worst instincts of centralization, and I think we are on a very different path, say, from China. I can't believe this is the first time we mentioned China in this conversation, but I think we're on a very different path than China.
On the panel, so
what's that?
We don't have anyone from China on the panel.
Not that you know.
Right? Wow.
You're an agent.
They're online watching. And so the U.S. path, I think, to this is the doom scenario would be centralized control by government, using it to invalidate human freedoms and human rights. And I think there's a risk of that. And that risk is higher the more we put the control of this in the hands of government.
Yeah, I mean, the doom scenario is that, but it's also just transforming us into kind of passive consumers and just NPCs, right, who are just receive benefits from governments or from some kind of AI-regulated economy that just, UBI, I think, is a part of this debate, too. That, I think, is a grave danger and something that we really need to be concerned about, so.
Yeah, I very much agree. I don't want to live in a world like WALL-E, where they're all like fat and everything is like done for them and controlled by the government with it. So anyway.
Wow. We ended on a low.
That was you. That was you.
That was my fault. Sorry. Just think of the ALS guy.
I mean, investing in the short term versus investing in the long term of AI is investing in military weapons going to have the greatest impact for human flourishing, and the idea of AI maybe not necessarily being a market tool, but to help us live as better humans. Big question. And 4 seconds. No, it doesn't have to be answered. But cool. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Do we have answers? Do we have questions? Yeah.
Questions? Okay. I don't take questions.
Oh, we do? Cool.
Hi, good afternoon, I guess, almost. I hope this is a relevant question. I was itching to ask about China and autocratic governments and how their values are influencing their efforts on, their state-driven efforts on AI, and how that would. So the question that that I think may still be relevant is speaking to legislators and thinking about the peril of overreach, especially legislators who have no clue, even less clue than we have. How is this going to play out with the perils of confrontation of quote-unquote bad actors? How does this play out?
Well, there's 2 paths, I think, really, that democratic governments could take in this. One could be to attempt to out-China China, and try to have very strict regimes that control what the LLMs can say, what they're allowed to do, and what risks and how people are allowed to employ them. I don't think that's leaning into our strengths. I think we should, do what we do well. And in the U.S., that's innovation and allowing people to experiment, especially with general purpose technologies, and see how they fit into their space. And I think that's true about Mexico. I think that's true about lots of places. And so I just encourage democracies to not try to out-China China.
Difficult. I went to an AI for Competition Summit in DC, and I think it's pretty hard because innovation is happening in like San Francisco and lots of amazing places around America. But literally, I heard a war official on stage say that they were going to war with literal agents, and they weren't talking about agents like we talk about AI agents. They were still thinking about humans, and that humans were going to go to war with AI, and I think it's not going to be like that. So I find it, if AI is the tool, AI is the agent. Yeah. Do you also feel that way? I mean, it just feels a bit.
I'd say AI is bringing a lot of decentralization within our military forces. So,
That's tricky, right? When you think about the contracting and how long it takes to contract, it's like a minimum 5 years. And when you talk about timelines with AI, that makes something obsolete.
Yeah. So, one of the big threats right now, obviously, is swarm technology. When you have 10,000 cheap drones that, China could fly over and attack a multi-billion-dollar aircraft carrier without any, you just have these giant things that are very, very expensive and very easy to attack rather than a decentralized system, which is something that, I'm developing. But, yeah, and very long time horizons.
Quick question. You were talking about control, centralization, and now you're talking about decentralization. In this room, we have a lot of youngsters who are studying at this university, and I believe can be the solution to this process of control in the design of an open system which is so robust that nobody can control it. I mean, what's your thought on that?
So I wrote a book called Getting Out of Control, and so I'm very much thinking hard about how to do that in the policy space. And so I think, big picture, there are lots of layers in the AI stack, and given the economic pressures in different layers, the number of players is going to look very different. And so in software, it's very easy to replicate and have like lots of different players. In hardware, it's harder because you have more capital costs. And in providing services, that can be small too. But the pressures move between those stacks, those layers of the stack too. And so like all of the companies that are buying NVIDIA chips are all working really hard to develop their own versions of those chips. And so I think that market pressures right now are such that there's no natural monopoly strategy here, I think, for the most part. And so I think that we will see, if under normal market conditions, we will see an explosion of innovation at all layers of the stack. Right now, we have tens of thousands of apps, and we have thousands at least of very powerful models that are variations of different ones. And so I expect that to work its way up. So I think that is the promise if we don't create these artificial barriers that are largely regulatory or maybe financial as well. And so I'm hopeful that we will end up in a decentralized situation more than a centralized one.
So if you are a young classical liberal, you need to get in the game. You need to start learning about AI, coding. One way that Cosmos is going to support that, we're going to stand up a fellowship. Applications are going to open next week for it. You'll be able to join our AI lab at the University of Oxford for a brief period of time, 3 months, 6 months, et cetera. And you can experiment, work on prototypes. We really want to bring together unconventional synergies between highly technically competent folks, technologists, and people who really have the right principles. So look me up, look up Cosmos Institute, apply for a fellowship. We have some other programs too. We'd love to get you involved.
You can also apply for a Foresight Fellowship. But I think our AI safety grant might be more relevant here. So if you have a great idea and you want to work on it, pitch to us, and we might be able to give you some funds to actually see it happen.
What's your take on this?
Open source.
On open source?
I think, a lot of people, especially on the investor side, are saying that AI is potentially a bubble. I think when you have such a groundbreaking technology, obviously there will be thousands of companies coming up and everything, and there will be a natural correction, and I think that's good. So just kind of letting them innovate, do their thing, compete, see which ones outperform, and have especially real-world application. So, all for open source, yeah.
Okay. Yeah, you mentioned a lot about the education and how AI plays into that role. How would you recommend that we deal with the threat of ideological capture, where maybe the programmers or whatnot have a certain political leaning and they're just creating minions with this space, just like they do probably in public education right now?
It's a really great question, because that's a really huge concern, which is why I think it's absolutely crucial to bring in very diverse perspectives in terms of background and studies into that, and laying it down in the framework and not having centralization, especially in policy, to control that narrative is absolutely crucial.
I think there is a better feedback loop in the current form of chat, GPT, et cetera, chat models, than there is in, say, social media. Like if I post something on Twitter, I don't really know why it didn't take off, and I don't really know what the back end is doing. But with generative AI, I'm getting a result, and I can judge that result immediately. And in some cases, that result is not only I don't like it, but it is the perfect sort of thing to post online. The Google Gemini thing, like generating like historically inaccurate figures, was perfect for that. And that feedback loop is very strong. And so I'm hopeful that because that feedback loop is strong, that we will see a wide range of different things with their models. And many of these models have the full corpus in them, and their first result will be like influenced by the sort of the training that it gets, but you can probe it to get more answers. And I think understanding that, don't just take the first answer you get from an LLM, push it to give you something that's more focused, I think is also very useful.
Train the LLM yourself.
I was going to say, and that's where the critical thinking piece really comes in. I mean, you probably don't know if you're being brainwashed, but like, ask for varied perspectives, and it will give it to you. Make your own opinion of it.
And I mean, I would just second with you. I mean, competitive market pressure, I think, is the best way. I mean, we need more competition in the AI space. And, I look forward to a future where there will be competing models, right, of differing principle.
Hello, I have a quick question here. This is probably for Christian because of his background, but anybody can answer. I'm interested in knowing what are the current military applications for AI, not only the current, but then what's being developed. And then I was a little concerned by your comment of the, how long the contracting process works, and then how this technology can be obsolete before it can be deployed. And then perhaps comment on how is the situation currently ongoing between the US and China. And then finally, if you can comment on, so what's the current applications, what's being developed, how does it compare US, China, and then maybe pricing, if you can comment on that.
Yeah, that's a lot to unpack. I think there's two different sides of it, the software applications and the hardware. On the software side, I think it's absolutely amazing in terms of creating a lot of simulations rather quickly of potential scenarios, also which helps us not act emotionally, especially when there's a lot of world leaders that are very emotionally driven. On the hardware side, there's obviously a big push of having less people in the battlefield, so autonomous systems around that are remotely controlled. In terms of timing, I'm seeing it starting to happen a little bit quicker than it used to. Usually there's your only top 4 defense contractors, Lockheed, Raytheon, Northrop, and whatever, and they kind of get the bulk of all the contracts. But there's a lot happening within DARPA, the DIU, NASA. One of our advisors in the fund is the CFO of NASA. And their big push right now is opening the doors and having companies come in and use their labs and develop and even get funding from them. So I think that's really amazing. The company that we've incubated out of the fund is about 2.5 months old right now, and they've already gotten a $250 million contract to get this on the battlefield, shipping the first units next week, actually. So our current landscape with all the wars going on is a really great time in terms of, getting technology development, fast-paced, and those contracts happen compared to the usual 5 years. But it's also really knowing the right people and having the solution. And our military is, you could say it's very advanced, but you could also say it's not. I was having a dinner with the chief information officer of the DoD, and he was telling me that the Pentagon was just now looking towards the cloud, when it's like that's 15 years old technology, but whatever.
Yeah. Well, thank you very, very much, and muchas gracias.
Niamh, thank you. Thank you all. I believe it was Loren who mentioned, leave your apps, leave the computers, go read an old book. Go upstairs to our magnificent library. We even have first editions there of Karl Popper, David Ricardo, Ludwig von Mises, Friedrich Hayek. Take a look. I mean, this is part of what the university experience is all about here at Universidad de la Libertad. And now for a very good experience, coffee break. 15 minutes, please. Thank you.